To get started, we're going to begin with a kind of overview of what is computational law. So a lot of the action today is about blockchain. Blockchain is a computational system, but there's a lot more in the world of computation than blockchain. And most of what's happening with legal technology and transformation of the law to more of an information-intensive, technology-enabled field is happening with other kinds of systems, other ways to automate processes and other ways to deal with data. We're seeing a lot with AI and analytics and basic business transformation or re-engineering using web technologies, databases, integrating systems. So what that means for the underlying context of law is sort of the subject of the first frame of reference setting session. And joining us from Kansas City Legal Hackers to help set the stage on that is Bryan Wilson, who chairs KC Legal Hackers and who joined us at MIT in January to actually co-teach the computational law course that we do every year there. And so this is sort of the best of his first day overview of what is computational law. So Bryan, welcome, and you want to introduce yourself and jump right in?
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Bryan Wilson. I work in operations at a startup called RiskGenius, and we use different AIs to break down and quantify insurance policy language. And as Dazza said, I helped co-instruct the computational law course, and I also manage Kansas City Legal Hackers chapter.
I'm supposed to say a couple of things before Bryan slides. One of them is when we're transforming a field, in the beginning it might look like if you want to fly, maybe we need a mechanical bird, with flapping wings, because that's what we know from the past. But it may be some business process re-engineering is appropriate in order to achieve the results that we want, like something more like a fixed wing airplane. So too with the law. Right now, thanks to Stanford Codex, there's a nice breakdown of what's happening in the legal tech market. There's a lot happening with dispute. You can't quite see it, but we'll make the slides available. But there's a lot going on with document assembly, with contracts, with online dispute resolution, practice management, predictive analytics. By my count, about half of what's going on in legal tech today is some form of automating existing processes and existing legal instruments, just making them digital and data-driven. And about half, and I think it's growing, is something that transforms law. So it's not the way that we used to do it at all. It's maybe model-based and depends upon chains of applications that transform the nature of the practice itself. So just as an almost ideological statement, what we really want to try to do with computational law is treat this information more like structured data and less like, my first slide, less like going from a parchment and making it PDF. Well, yeah, that's digital, but is it computational? Not really. Not really. Maybe you can scrape a little metadata off it. But here's an example of what what structured data looks like. XML has been widely applied to law. JSON is more the language of the day. And now, once things are more in structured data and expected formats, and according to some standards that can be applied across different boundaries and contexts, having interfaces like basic REST interfaces are critical in the law. This is not currently individual applications or particular government agencies like the Federal Register support REST interfaces to interrogate their data or to integrate something. But ultimately in the law, we imagine and we suggest we should start to have more standardized types of interfaces and more expected design patterns so that we can integrate more and more processes and legal instruments in standard ways. So we can start getting more ecologies of automation. And once you do that, you can have listeners and triggers and literally start to connect processes so that they operate more and more in more of an automated way. And then we're going to explore, especially with smart contracts and blockchain, some things can in fact be autonomous. Everybody should use GET, the GET protocol. This is a theological statement. I will not go further into that. We should also express our data, and this is oversimplifying it, but think about it as 3 layers. Something that's human readable, a simple, plain language rendition that summarizes whatever the instruments are for lawyers and for regular people alike. Something that's lawyer readable, all of the terms and conditions and the nuances with indemnification or the particulars, and something that's machine readable, something that's more like data. So this is best practice, I'd say now, for expressing everything from statutes and regs to contracts and other legal instruments, and having a better sense in the law of what a how to display data, not only with dashboards and things like that, but also the user experience, so that it's more of a human-centered experience is going to be critical. And then finally, at the Media Lab, we think a lot about the implications of AI and autonomous systems. So one vision that a lot of people have is sort of like this. Who's this? C-3PO. It's an autonomous system. But there's another vision that we've really embraced at the Media Lab. We call it extended intelligence. And if I had to oversimplify it, it might be more like Iron Man. So now we've got automated systems, and including autonomous systems, the collision control and targeting and a lot of stuff in there, stuff that adjusts for pitch and roll, but it's extending the cognition and the capabilities of people. This is another way to look at how we can harness automation and autonomous systems, but where the role of lawyers and clients and policymakers could still be very central. And we need a stack, some kind of stack for the law. Okay, so with that, Bryan, you're up.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so as I was saying, I think everybody here is kind of gathered to better understand the different ways that we can compute the various legal functions that allow our society to kind of operate at an optimal level. And so what does that look like? Michael Ginnister, Codex, kind of came up with this idea that computational law is that branch of legal informatics concerned with the mechanization of legal analysis. And this can be done either by humans or machines. And in the paper where he kind of set this out, he likened it to having a cop in the backseat that can let you know about the regulations like speed limit, whether or not you're able to make a U-turn, and kind of like really contextualizing the way that could look. And so, looking forward, there are a lot of possibilities out there. And so many of the lawyers and legal scholars and anybody who's kind of been familiar with legal writing will know this is kind of a structure that exists for like breaking down and writing about the law. You have an issue, you apply some rule to that issue, you analyze the way that rule should be inferred based on the context around you, and then you arrive at a conclusion. With computational law, there's kind of a similar structure that we can derive. I don't know that the acronym necessarily flows, but you have data, you have all of these pieces of disparate information. You can input them into some sort of form that could be like Google Forms, that could be something like an expert system. It could be kind of whatever you imagine. After that, there's some computational layer that is applied, and then you arrive at some output. And so you might be asking yourself, what are all of these arbitrary things? How are they connected? So in the legal industry, this data could be static. It could be like the DC code up on GitHub. So it's got different laws or regulations. It could also be something that's live. It could be from an open data portal. It could be something that's interacting with an API. And then you put it into one of these forms that allows you to harmonize kind of these different layers that Dazza was previously talking about, the BLT terms. You'll have your human readable, your machine readable, and your kind of like legal code there. And this is going to like necessarily require a higher degree of specification. So an added benefit of a system like this is that it prevents lawyers from being lazy and forces them to actually specify what laws they're supposed to do. Something that is really important for the internet. And with laws like fraud abuse, it's kind of scary what happens with these sorts of things if you don't do that. Yeah, once you have that input, once you have that data and that input, you get to that level of computation. And so you have functions that automatically send emails, they automatically create records, they allow you to monitor compliance. You could even get into some of the more fun stuff like machine learning, AI, smart contracts, all the sorts of things that I imagine people here here participating in the Computational Law and Blockchain Festival. These are the sorts of things that I think get everybody excited. So once you've done that, your data can be used in a way that allows the law to be more human. So you could have reports that allow you as a lawyer to kind of do your job more effectively. You could have some tools that allow you as a citizen to be able to navigate the process of getting your immigration papers filed, your divorce papers filed, whatever it may be. And this moves us forward in a progressive way. So going to get in a little bit into some vignettes that really drive these points home. So TurboTax has data about your tax filings. The user inputs that data into a form. This expert system helps you calculate your tax liabilities. Your state and federal tax returns are generated. With Do Not Pay, they have information about the ways that you might sue corporations. They have information about state and federal laws. That information is input into an application on your phone. They compute the amount of money that you could possibly sue for, and your claims are automatically generated. DLA Piper has a great global map of all of the data protection laws of the world that is interactive. If you get a chance, it's a really fun tool to play around with. But they have all this data about the global data protection laws. User can kind of navigate, drag laws to compare them and see, what's happening. Like if I'm a lawyer, and I've got a client who wants to deal with data in the EU, it might be helpful to see where the differences between GDPR exist with the laws of Canada, where we also want to market our product. And so you can automatically generate those reports and see the differences of the laws between the various nation states. Relativity Trace is also another cool tool. They have data about insider trading. They have a lot of data that they've collected about insider trading and compliance regulations. They monitor email communication in real time. They can flag suspicious activity and identify that for their security officers and their compliance officers, and then actually set up some dashboards to help visualize the areas where compliance and non-compliance are more easily understood. And so part 2 of this is going to look at DocAssemble as like a really cool tool. It's an open source tool that allows you to set up some of these computational legal frameworks pretty quickly. And so DocAssemble was developed by Jonathan Pyle. It's completely free. It's open source. It is based in Python, YAML, and Markdown. You can do a lot of cool stuff that is very beneficial for lawyers, kind of like the Iron Man suit for lawyers. It allows you to generate documents in PDF. It allows you to send faxes, among other things. And you can integrate with your file management system. You can set up chatbots that help your clients navigate to the services that they need more effectively. You can do all of this in GitHub so that you can collaborate with other lawyers all over the place who are doing sort of similar things. You can improve the best practices. You can come up with standardized ways of working on this stuff that makes the practice of law more transparent. And the way that you can do this is by deploying DocSimple. You can set up your own Docker container and run it locally, or you could use the great New York-based group called Community.Lawyer. They've got a ton of really cool tools that allow you to kind of go in and for free set up your own guided interviews about how to do this. And kind of an overview of the functions. These are those little pieces of code that actually allow you to compute the law. So as you can see here, it's not as intimidating as certain programming languages. You set up your question, you allow people to input their answer, and then you say, what sort of computation will be applied, and it does it. You can visualize that on the left. That's the infrastructure that allows you to get to the piece on the right that actually returns what you need. And so here's a list of all of the functions that are available. I'm not going to read through all of them because we have posted these slides on the page for the web page for this event. So feel free to check these out when you have a chance, and you can kind of learn more. All of the links are working. But yeah, you can take data, you can walk through this guided interview, you can generate advice letters, you can generate complaints for custody, you can generate certificates of incorporation. And if you ever have questions, you can collaborate with other people who are doing the same stuff on GitHub. DocSimple has Slack that's open for everybody. And I don't know if they're at this event, but Community Lawyer, again, is another great group that you can reach out to here. And with all of that, I think that's everything that I had. I'll hand it back over to Dazza.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Bryan. That was awesome as usual. So before we move on with the program, let's just pause for a moment to see if there's any feedback or questions about all of that. So, and we can use the mic for questions. So questions are not mandatory. Oh, here we go. One in the back.
Two in the back. Great.
I heard you mention what I thought was a New York City resource called Got Lawyer, and I couldn't turn that up quickly searching. Maybe I misheard.
Did you hear that, Bryan? Did you mention?
No, I missed.
Did you mention a resource called Got Lawyer?
I do not believe so. I can look it up real quick.
Sorry, so it was something you had mentioned for help in getting this set up, a type of community organization.
Oh, sorry.
What's the group that's doing the GitHub doing DocAssemble for lawyers?
Yeah, it's called community.lawyer. So if you just type into your browser the word community, and then you put a period, and then you type the word lawyer, it will take you there.
Come again? Oh, so we may have a community.lawyer named Mike here today. It's definitely worth checking in if you guys aren't familiar with DocAssemble or the legal-facing instance of that with community.lawyer. Definitely get this onto your radar.
If folks are interested in DocAssemble and Community Lawyer, we will be hosting on June 21st at Brooklyn Law School full-day workshopping on using DocAssemble. And Community Lawyer will be very active. Community Lawyer essentially has built an overlay, user-friendly overlay on top of DocAssemble.
And one of the best parts of this is the integrations. So that long list of integrations, some of those could be oracles or inputs or outputs from blockchain. Yes?
Thank you very much for the introduction to computational law. This is the first time I personally have learned the term exists. So being very greenfield here, please allow me to ask a rather simple, what I think is rather simple question. And if it is too simple, please forgive me. Who are the sort of main stakeholder groups in computational law?
Did you hear the question, Brian? Who are the main
Could
stakeholder
you
groups
repeat
in
it?
computational law? It's a good question.
The main groups that I'm familiar with, I mean, we're doing some stuff with the computational law course. All of that is available online. I know Stanford through Codex has a research group that's devoted to like computational legal functions. There are some different government branches around the world who are doing stuff with this. There are a handful of other groups. I could pull up and add to the slides some of these groups, and I'll make a note to do that so that people can better connect with them.
Great. Also, something that comes to mind is the American Bar Association Legal Analytics Committee. It's got a whole cluster of people doing things. A longstanding group that's been around for decades is AI and the Law Conference. It's more academics, but that's a whole different stakeholder group. And actually, if you go to Codex and look at the index of legal tech, so go to Stanford Law or search Stanford Law, Codex, and Index. They've got a terrific directory of all the startups. So it's another stakeholder group of providers of tools and services and applications. And that's broken down according to kind of area of law and also type of technology.
Exactly. There are literally hundreds, if you go to that site, of legal tech startups that are in some way associated with computational law. I would also say that Codex, can't speak for all of Codex, but there's very much the opinion that this is kind of the next step in the evolution of legal practice. And obviously, different segments of computational law, the timing is different. It's not going to happen all at once, but anything from even, let's say, legal service, making that more of I would say an egalitarian, more wider access rather than a privilege, right? Things like that. They're just very different kind of segment swaths that I would say converge in a lot of ways, and we expect more convergence in the future. So this is happening a bit behind the scenes, but also a lot of these legal tech startups are becoming more prominent, especially I would say in the Bay Area, where there's already kind of a tech infrastructure very much that's open to using these new platforms. So keep attention, I guess, see what's going to happen.
Yep, the Bay Area, and also geographically, I think we should point out Toronto is just a hot spot. It's a hub of innovation with legal tech. I think owing partly to outflow and collaborations with McGill, but I don't know exactly why. But it's the perfect storm of legal tech right now. A lot of startups, a lot of new ideas. Ethereum, among other great things. So, Google Street Labs. Maybe one more, and then we should probably. We're not that far behind the first panel, which you're running, Steve. Okay. Well, okay. Let's let this run for a while.
Hi. Thank you so much for that presentation. This is completely. This has been a black box for me as well. So all this is so enlightening. It might be too early of a question, but what type of challenges have you guys personally seen, or do you guys foresee as we're kind of trying to adopt this new amazing technology? What type of challenges do you see in terms of adoption and sticking, for that matter? Because as we all know, there are many great technologies, but sticking is always kind of a different issue. So do you see maybe like, is it the matter of education? Is it because like a lot of people are kind of fearing what it is? Like that word computation scares people? Or is it a question of like institutions kind of continuing to do it their way and you don't see adoption there? Like what sort of challenges essentially have you seen in terms of adoption?
So the question, Brian, was what kind of challenges have we seen for adoption? And I could get us started. At a high level, one thing to bear in mind is that the law is obviously law is its own field, so we have training and regulation and licensure, but very much I think the overall context is law is part of it's like marbled in every other sector of the economy and part of society. So when you look at commerce, or you look at industrial systems, you look at public sector systems, they're not primarily about law, but law is sort of one part of the stack, and maybe not the big decision makers on when do we choose to migrate to a new IT system and what are the priorities for those systems. The terms and conditions and things have got exist, but it's hardly driving the design of the systems. I think there's also some reticence, or I think the law it's hard to generalize, but the personality of the field is somewhat conservative, and so the more conservative that the orientation of the sort of sensibility of the culture, the less prone it is to be an early adopter of new technologies, which, by the way, is not so bad. Being first to be second on some of this stuff can allow for more stable, reliable, predictable kinds of systems. Another thing is it's actually not obvious how the law would transform as a result of these technologies. So with air traffic control, it was pretty obvious. We're tracking the flights and, again, collision detection and routing. And with factory automation, it's pretty obvious. With the law, there's so many facets of law, and I think most of how the law is going to transform has not yet been invented. So some of it is just figuring out as we go. We're sort of re-engineering the bicycle while we're riding it. And then one other thing is just what I was trying to hammer on for my own hobby horse, trying to do analytics and data science on law at MIT, is just so much of the corpus of the existing law is not yet really suitable for computation. That's why we're mired in natural language processing and other types of systems where we're like paving the cow paths or making mechanical birds. So starting like at the essence or like the DNA at the design phase of structuring our legal instruments and our rules and our processes so that they are like structured data that's computable is another barrier to adoption, I think. Do you want to extrapolate on that, Bryan? You're very much in the front lines in your startup.
Sure. Yeah, I think one of the biggest challenges to getting things like this off the ground and making sure that they stick kind of in the way that you described was there really needs to be a degree of openness that a lot of people, I would say, aren't super comfortable with. I mean, looking back at how the internet was able to thrive, it wasn't really until they adopted the open standards of protocols that that you could really see the true potential of the internet to connect people, to allow people to share ideas back and forth. And I think with kind of these AI and computational ways of thinking, it's very similar. There isn't going to be the kind of the flourishing that is possible unless we really have it so that it is interoperable and people are able to kind of like whittle down these ideas with each other. And so to me, that seems like a big challenge, but also, moving the legacy providers away from, using Internet Explorer. That's kind of like one of the things that I deal with on a daily basis is, a lot of the biggest companies, especially, or speaking for insurance, a lot of the biggest insurance carriers in the world, like they mainly use Internet Explorer because of how risk averse they are. And so, until people are willing to do these things, until people have kind of like a playground where they can, experiment with these sorts of ideas in ways that prevents them from losing risk, and until people can kind of like audit and like reduce that degree of, opacity such that, people can understand and like see, okay, if I put this in and it spits this stuff out, that really is a good thing, and it's not sentencing people for unnecessarily long amounts of time because they're a certain race, they're a certain gender. And so I think being able to kind of actually experiment with these sorts of things scientifically is something that will allow it to flourish and like kind of maintain itself as a like cool innovation for how we move forward.
Yeah. So I think, why don't we take a couple more questions, you and then Brendan. But one thing I'd like to note on that last note that Bryan mentioned, so the first thing he said, which is, I wish I had said in retrospect, was we need something more like open standards. And from open standards, like dominoes, many of the other barriers or inhibitors to adoption, I think, will start to fall that I'd mentioned. But the last thing he said is more of a scientific approach. So, one of the two words in data science is science. And so On that note, Bryan and I and Jonathan and other people are banding together at MIT Media Lab from the Human Dynamics Group to launch on April 27th the MIT Computational Law Report. So it'll be sort of like a journal. It'll have articles, but the reason we're calling it a report is it's also going to have some rich media like podcasts and interviews, but also like a data playground. So what we're starting, you'll see on the submission button, one of the things you can submit is your projects or your or data science, and so we'll be looking to get the underlying data that you used, what the scripts or the Python notebook or whatever it was, and what versions of software you used, just so we can see if we can get reproducibility. Could we reproduce the same results you had, and that way have more of a scientific method applied to the underlying algorithms and the other types of software. This is some of why we feel we can rely upon science in other sectors of the economy. And when we have this type of rigor in the law using data science and other automation and methods, computational methods, then we may be able to have a more reasonable, a valid and just basis to use it for things like sentencing guidelines or like other very sensitive areas of law. But right now, there's understandable reticence to do that because it's still quite buggy. So the idea of introducing science methods into the data science of law, we really want to underscore, and we want to try to do our part at MIT, and we hope you'll all do your part as well. So 2 more questions, you, and then Brendan, and then where's Steve? And then let's get into the first panel. Okay, so you're up.
Thanks. So it seems to me like the community lawyer and open law projects are premised on the idea that the benefits of open source philosophy map onto computational law and perhaps also the practice of law. And so I'm wondering whether the panel agrees with that premise, and if so, why?
I don't know if I understood the premise.
So the premise is that the benefits of open source software development and principles will also apply to essentially the practice of law.
Oh, I got you. Did you hear that?
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, there's been the litigation recently with the information. I think it was with Pacer. They're charging too much for that, and it's really increasing the kind of like digital divide that has led to all of the access to justice problems that have arisen. People don't have the tools to empower themselves. It's like everybody has to go to a restaurant to order, their legal services when they could go to a grocery store and find tools and ingredients that they could use themselves to, solve their legal issue to the extent that they need it solved. It's kind of like a monolithic sort of world out there, and it can be more dynamic. And I think the openness, especially around the information about how the law is, like what the law is, how it's applied, I think that's critically important for moving forward in a meaningful way.
Could you pass the microphone to Brendan? And I'd extrapolate on that a little bit, which is with so you zeroed in on open source. I think there's 3 relevant open dimensions: open data. So in particular, things like cases or statutes or other legal information needs to express itself as a service and an interface. If it's your private data, at your firm for analyzing risk and liability or whatever, that's not necessarily open data. But a lot of the law it's supposed to be public. It's the quintessential public document, and yet it's not really accessible. Open source and the applications, I think, Bryan mentioned, but then there's also open standards, and that's where I think I think that deserves at least as much priority as any other dimension. So the more standards we have that are open at the messaging layer and the the interface layer and some structured data layers for different types of law, the much better off we'll be. And I do think that that's a premise for a wide-scale adoption of computational law. So it's going to be Jonathan. Brendan has the last question, and then we go to Steve's panel.
I actually just want to comment on the last question and the question before, because there's a big piece we're missing. How many are lawyers in the room? A lot of us. So we all know this. We are a fucking gilded profession. We are gatekeepers, and we will be damned to let other people use our tools for their own purposes. This is going to require more than a generational shift. To see Bryan up here revolutionizing the law, he's 30 years old. It's going to be his lifetime mission to change the law, but it's not going to happen until he is a member of the senior class of the gilded profession. Openness is not, it's anathema to what the legal profession is about. We worked 10 years ago on trying to open up PACER. You know who our biggest obstacles were? It wasn't the Republican Congress, it was the ACLU. I was raised by the general counsel of the ACLU. I know and love the ACLU. But people from the ACLU told us, do not try to make PACER documents free. Do not open it up, because it will mean a $300 million shortfall in funding the federal judiciary, and we need to ensure a funded federal judiciary. That was their analysis. So essentially, we're fighting for closeness even among the liberal left attorneys out there. We are the trusted agents, and until we create perfect systems, the lawyers are not going to let that go. And even if you are an enterprising, ambitious, young attorney at a law firm, you still answer to that 60, 70-year-old partner. So until you are that 60 or 70-year-old partner, and until we have those open tools and acknowledge that we've now created better trust agents than the legal profession can provide, that's what we're going to be stuck with.
And of course, there's hope right now before you turn 60, because there already are rays of light all around the world. I just came back from Paris, a computational law conference. Many of us were in Beijing at a computational law conference last month. We mentioned Toronto and other things that are happening. So there's lots of little areas where the future is starting to sprout. And some firms are embracing it. Some small firms are fully born digital now. And there's more of a conservative adoption, as Jonathan was mentioning, but even in big firms like Allen Overy, Baker Hostetler, and others have done a good job with their CIOs and their partners and senior associates at adopting in certain practice areas. So I do think the future is beginning to, it's hard to hold back the light of dawn. So I do think it is happening. Brendan, you want to bring us home with your question?
Yeah, sure. Brendan Marr here. The question was about stakeholders. These contracts are going to touch everybody, every aspect of society, everything, nothing is going to be left untouched. But the way to think about it is that we're not going to have people just calling up their lawyer and writing contracts. It's not going to happen that way. What is going to happen is that you in this room are going to get paired up with entrepreneurs, and you're going to write the stuff on the back end of platforms to go out and touch and bring this stuff to billions of people. And that's how I believe it's going to happen.
All right, so with that exhortation, why don't we wind up our panel, and let's everybody thank Bryan for coming in a morning. Thanks, Bryan.
Thank you guys for having me.
Legal hacker, right there.